We don't define God. God defines himself. I'm reading from Exodus chapter 20, starting with verse 1. Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and on the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave you unpunished who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God, and in it you shall do no work, you or your sons or your daughters or your male or your female servants or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and all that is in them rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So the first set of commandments deals with our relationship with Yahweh Elohim. In early part of Exodus, God has revealed himself to Moses, saying, I am Yahweh, this is who I am. And he revealed himself saying, I define myself by my revelation in your life. You're not going to define me philosophically. You're not going to define me by making idols. I will define myself. God doesn't want Moses to define him. He said, I will make my own definition. Okay? And so when we come to the Ten Commandments, God is picking up from there. He's saying, I am Yahweh. I am your Elohim. I am the Yahweh Elohim who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And because I am the one who delivered you, I'm active in your life. You saw my signs and wonders. And because of that, you can have no other gods before me or beside me. There's no other gods. And you shall not make for yourself any idols on any kind of representation, because God defines himself, because he's real. He doesn't need a definition. It's like a father having to define himself to his children. His father, he defines himself by being a father. And God doesn't need to define himself to us. He doesn't need a representation, because he hasn't gone anywhere. He's right here. And he will reveal himself when he chooses to. And so, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and you shall remember the Sabbath day, and on the Sabbath day particularly you will remember the God's activity and deliverance, and you shall take time to worship him. So you have a lot of things in the first commandments that deal with our relationship with God, that God is the only God, and he's the only one that can be worshipped. We cannot worship any other creature, man-made or not, on the earth or above the earth or under the earth. To worship any other being other than Yahweh God, Elohim, is a breaking or a violation of the Ten Commandments. The rest of the commandments, honoring parents, thou shalt not murder, shall not commit adultery, shall not steal, false witness, and desiring to commit the others, has to do with our relationship first out of worship. As we worship God, our morality comes out of the worship, because we are acknowledging that God is supreme in the universe and that we're made in his image. And because we're made in the image of God, we have to behave a certain way. We can't be like lions or tigers who eat one another, the animal kingdom. We're not like that. We have to behave a certain way because we're made in God's image, and because God is holy, and that's who we are. And so our morality comes from that. Now, Paul argues this very thing in Romans chapter 1. That morality comes out of understanding who God is and our relationship with him. And he begins this in Romans chapter 1, verse 18. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness or with unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. Even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculation, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, birds, and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Now, you notice how Paul's reasoning is. First of all, we have an adequate knowledge about God from nature, so that we look at nature and we don't see God. God is not in nature. Nature's violent. Nature is aggressive. And it's in the Ten Commandments that is actually codified, that God says, I am not in nature. As he explained to Moses, because Moses was raised in a culture where God and nature were the same. But it's out of first understanding that God and nature are not the same that we come to the realization that because God and nature are not the same, God is apart from it, he is holy, he's incorruptible, and therefore we're not to make images of him that are corruptible. Now, Paul continues with this. Therefore God gave them over to the lusts of their hearts, to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For exchange the truth of God for a lie, and worship and serve the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Now, so when we worship God in a wrong way, and we see in God nature rather than that he transcends nature, that he's apart from nature, and that he's not corruptible, that he's spirit. And spirit is not have the passions of the flesh. So God does not desire the passions of the flesh. And he's not corruptible in that way. And because we exchange the image of God in our mind with the image of creation, then we go down that slippery slope into sexual sin. To Paul, there's a big connection between our worship and the way we live. They exchange the truth of God for a lie and worship the creature. And they're futile in their speculations about God. They become futile. Now, you can become futile in speculating who God is, both as looking at God as nature, but you could also look at God as abstract philosophy. And we can say, well, God is just abstract philosophy and that he doesn't connect with life. It's not at all like the God, Yahweh, Elohim, who revealed himself to Moses as the God who's present. And if you really believe that, if you're worshiping a God who's present, you're going to behave a different way than if you really believe God is abstract and lives in a completely different dimension of some kind. Verse 26 of Romans 1. For this reason God gave them over to the degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function of that which is unnatural, and in the same way also men abandoned the natural function of the women and burned in their desire toward one another. Men for men, committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to depraved mind, to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, evil, greed, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossipers, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful, and although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. The ethics of God come out of the nature of God and our relationship with God. You see that in Paul's understanding. It's laid out in the Ten Commandments, but it's also Paul's interpretation of the Ten Commandments, that he realizes that our behavior ethically towards one another comes out of our worship of God. If we see God as transcendent and as holy being, and we see that we're made in God's image personally, and that God reveals himself to us, then our behavior, our ethical behavior comes out of that nature. We are made in the image of God and in a certain way. And so, having been made in the image of God, we understand that God is personal and that we can have a relationship with him. And this is implied strongly in the Ten Commandments, that God is a personal God and that we can have a relationship with him. We're to live by the Ten Commandments because out of the Ten Commandments it's an expression of who we are as people under the divine providence of God, of God's provision for us, provision of life, provision of wisdom and knowledge as he's providing for us. The single statement of faith in the Old Testament and among the Jewish people and the Hebrew faith is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your might. And you shall teach these diligently to your sons and your daughters when you lie down and when you walk in the way. And you shall bind them on signs on your hands, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on your doorposts and on your gates. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh is one." Now that's a big discussion. So in that, the interpretation of this passage, God is revealing himself to Israel as one in the sense that there are no other gods but him. And you cannot make an image of him because he's not like anything here. God is not like anything that is in the creation that he's made. And so he cannot use any kind of representation of God to describe God to ourselves or to our children. We worship God only, and he's one in the sense that there's no one like him. There's no other gods out there, and we're to love him and that. The whole time, of course, he's using Yahweh, the Yahweh that was revealed to Moses, with that plural name for God. Now, I was asked by a Buddhist young lady here last year to explain to her why there are many gods in the universe. She wanted to know why there are so many gods. And as I began to talk to her, we took a basket of fruit, and I said, let's pretend that the basket of fruit is the universe. And there were bananas and oranges and apples and all kinds of things in the basket. And I said, so every fruit is a god. And I said, where is the God that created the basket? Is he in the basket? She said, no. And she began to think about it, and she looked at me, and she raised her hands up and she says, I understand. The God of the universe, the God who made the universe, the God who made the basket and all the fruit in it, himself is not in the universe in the same way that the fruit was in the basket. Because the fruit in the basket is contained by the basket. But God himself is not contained by the universe. He's not contained in the universe. He can interact in the universe, and this is what he was communicating to Moses. I'm not fruit in a basket. I will communicate to you. I will reveal myself to you on my own choosing, at my own time, in my own way. I can work in the basket, but I don't live in the basket. He had to reveal this to his people first. Before he began to reveal intimately what he's really like, he first had to get us to realize who we were dealing with, and that to not try to define God, but to let him define himself. I think that's very crucial as we look at the early parts of the Old Testament. At the Pentateuch, is that God does not want definitions that we make up. He will reveal himself to us on his own terms and in his own way. And the first thing that we see is that God is not in the basket. He's not one of the many gods that we have made, but he wants us to learn who he is by allowing him to define himself. And I think that's the key message in the Pentateuch, because God will reveal himself and is revealing himself through the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, which is the Hebrew people. And God is going to reveal himself through the Hebrew people. Israel is a bridge between three continents. And like it or not, and a lot of times they don't like it, but that's the case. God revealed himself through a people that he put on a bridge between three continents. And by doing that, he could spread the message of this, I am Yahweh, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He could spread it through three continents in three directions. And that's pretty much stated in Scripture. But it's not because they're special. It's actually because they weren't special.